Minister, domestic violence is at epidemic levels. Women's Aid has published its annual report and it makes for very grim reading. Last year they received the highest number of domestic abuse complaints in their 50-year history. All forms of abuse against women have increased. Physical abuse is up 22%, sexual abuse by 30%, emotional abuse up 15%, economic abuse up 5%. And a third of women who reached out for help were subjected to abuse by an ex-partner, so the relationship may end, but the abuse does not. All the statistics are going in the wrong direction. And Women Aid says that this is only the tip of the iceberg. Minister, behind these statistics are real women and their children, real lives shattered. The report reflects that government must do a far better job to achieve zero tolerance of violence against women. After 15 years of government strategy on domestic violence, where are we? Well, we still don't have a women's refuge in every county. We've a judicial system that doesn't work for victims, inconsistent, even lenient sentences for perpetrators. Victims looking to take out barring orders against their abuser yet unable to secure legal representation. And 44% of victims reporting that they found the Gardaí unhelpful in a domestically violent situation. We still don't have a register of domestic abusers to protect women from repeat offenders. That's the aim of legislation named in honour of Jenny Poole. Jenny was stabbed to death by her abuser in 2021, a man with a history of violence against women. She didn't know that, neither did her family. Jenny was 24. Support services remain underfunded and overstretched, and government is failing to meet your legal obligations in respect of refuge spaces. You're also failing to ensure that refuges provide the vital wraparound services that women and children needed. I'm also mindful that refuges are not the ultimate answer. They are a very necessary but temporary protection, not a long-term solution. The needs of women fleeing domestic violence have to be hardwired into the response to the housing crisis. And of course, the question has to be asked, why is it that it's the victim who's forced to leave her home, but the perpetrator remains undisturbed? What message does this send to women fighting to survive? After 15 years of government strategy, you're still talking about basic training initiatives for frontline responders. Where is the urgency? None of this is good enough. Women faced with violence and abuse deserve far, far more. Le rion thurscol scanalach de cuid Women's Aid in Uguil epidem e dulanolcus, module le furrig in Ballia, agus gur gergo le gníomh Lloyd your own Oireachtas. Minister, in my own constituency, the community isn't waiting. Women have come together to campaign for zero tolerance of violence against women in all places where we live our lives. We want every commercial, sporting and community space to be a zero tolerance space. And Minister, after 15 years of government strategy on domestic violence, women are now looking for vision and action that will actually make a difference. So where is the step change from government that will actually deliver to ensure zero tolerance and that women and children are safe?
Minister Dumo Callaghan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deputy, and I want to thank you for raising the Women's Aid report. In fact, at 11 o'clock this morning, I was down in Woodkey and I launched that report. And first of all, I want to commend Women's Aid for the excellent work that they have done for 51 years in Ireland in identifying the unacceptable behaviour of abuse against women. Deputy, you raise a number of issues which government is dealing with, and I can just identify a few of them. You refer to the criminal justice system and how it needs to be adapted in order to ensure that women can feel more confident about coming before the courts, to ensure that the criminal acts against them are dealt with appropriately by the courts. I've already received approval from government to bring forward an amendment to Sexual Offences Act to ensure that the issue of counselling notes will be dealt with properly once and for all. Under the legislation that I'm bringing forward and that government has approved, it will mean that counselling notes will only ever be able to be used in trials if it is the case that to not use them would result in an unfair trial. I also want to let you know about the issue in respect of the Register for Domestic Violence. I had the privilege of last week of meeting Jason Poole along with my colleague Senator Fiona O'Loughlin and Deputy Paul McAuliffe. He has been to the forefront of trying to ensure that there is some mechanism in place to ensure that women who are the victims of abusers, that they can find out information about men who have previously abused and been convicted of criminal offences in respect of other women. That work is ongoing in my department. You also mentioned, Deputy, about refuge spaces, and I want to agree with you. It should not be the case that the first instinct and the first port of call when a woman is subjected to domestic abuse in her home is that we say, oh, how can we find another place for that woman to live? The response should be, how can we get the abuser out of the home? And of course, there are mechanisms in place to ensure that is being done, whether it is through barring orders or safety orders or other mechanisms that are available to women who find themselves in the appalling situation of being subjected to domestic abuse. I think that's an area that I'm committed to ensuring is adequately funded. It's also the case, Deputy, you asked about, well, what has the government done? I have to commend my predecessor for the work that she did in this area. She established a separate statutory agency, CUAN, that has daily responsibility for trying to ensure that there are refuge spaces. I agree with you in terms of what you say about it shouldn't be our first port of call, but it is unquestionably the case that we do require refuge spaces throughout the country. I've visited very many of them. An excellent refuge in Drogheda is really an example of how it should be done. There'll be one opening in my own constituency shortly in Ringsend. But in order for that to happen, and for the progress to be seen to be advanced in the area of refuge spaces, it's a huge benefit that we have a separate statutory agency, CUAN, that is focusing on getting those refuge spaces. I think it's also the case that by having a separate statutory agency in place, it really shows the seriousness with which government is treating this issue. Yesterday, I got approval from government in respect of the zero tolerance strategy, the final implementation plan for the strategy that goes up to the end of 2026. It shows that government, and I have to say every member of this House, is taking this issue extremely seriously. You're right about the numbers of individuals who are responding to women's aid. And indeed, on Garda Síochána got over 60,000 complaints of domestic abuse last year. Behind each of those statistics is a story, and really we just can't get lost in the narrative of statistics. You mentioned about An Garda Síochána. You know, I was concerned about the fact that a percentage of women weren't satisfied with their initial engagement with the Gardaí, but the majority were. And we need to reflect that the majority of women were. And there is training that is ongoing in Templemore in respect to this issue. I'm sure it can be improved, but the Gardaí do an excellent job in this area.
Deputy MacDonald.
Thank you, Minister. So the reality is this, and let me acknowledge at the outset actions that have been taken by government and the commitment that you have made here to the House in respect of Jenny's Law and in respect of further reform. That is welcome, but it's not enough. Because the evidence on the ground reflects that violence against women and against their children is not taken with the seriousness that it deserves. Those are the facts on the ground. Women feel unsafe. Women in very, very dangerous circumstances find it difficult to leave and difficult to access the supports that they require. I've said to you, Minister, we've had 15 years of strategy. What we need now is a step change in delivery, a step change in resourcing. CUAN, the statutory agency, it is slow. The provision of refuge space is slow. The lack of standardisation is undesirable. The lack of wraparound services. Minister, I don't want you to deliver just more of the same. We need a real step change if we are to achieve zero tolerance.
Minister O'Callaghan.
Deputy, I just want you to know domestic violence against women is taken extremely seriously by this government. I outlined some of the measures in my response to you, but there is more that is ongoing. I didn't mention the fact that we're going to amend the Guardianship of Infants Act that's going to ensure that there are greater rights for the families of children whose mother generally has been murdered by the father of the child. We need to ensure that the father doesn't retain exclusive responsibility after that. I also want you to know that a sign of how serious this government is taking it is that last week at the North-South Ministerial Council, it was on the agenda. Myself and Naomi Long decided that this issue of domestic violence against women is an issue of such seriousness that it affects the whole island, and we put it on the agenda of the North-South Ministerial Council. Kuhn has had a really significant impact, in my view, and it shows the seriousness with which the government is taking this issue and the unacceptability that happened in the past where women tolerated and people didn't listen to them when they were subjected to domestic abuse. Those days are over, and part of the reason why more people are coming forward is women feel confident to come forward.
Thank you. And just before we move to our next leader's question, I'd like to welcome in our visitors gallery His Excellency Arthur Michalski, Ambassador to Poland, Ambassador of Poland to Ireland, and he is today accompanied by Agnieszka Skolomanska, First Councillor at the Embassy. You're very welcome. And now we move to the Labour Party, Deputy Ivana Bacci.
Your Magad Cancorla. At the outset, I want to mark the sad passing of Jackie Brown, who died yesterday. I had the pleasure of knowing and working with Jackie as an activist on thalidomide over many years. It was very sad to hear the news. May she rest in peace. Minister, with their report today, Women's Aid has highlighted the reality that we have an epidemic of violence against women in Ireland. We of course acknowledge progress has been made in recent years. Ireland does now have the agency CUAN. We have a suite of laws designed to institute zero tolerance for gender-based and domestic violence. And you've referred, Minister, earlier to other changes you're bringing forward on counselling notes. That's welcome. But all these laws are ineffective if the first line of defence, the Gardaí, are not implementing them adequately. And that's the charge made by Women's Aid today. In their survey, they found that nearly half of women who sought help from the Guards in the last year found the response unhelpful. And Minister, that is appalling. And that finding reflects a pattern. In March, the Garda Inspectorate reported huge variations in rates of arrest, including for breaches of domestic violence orders across Garda divisions. Previous studies showed, for example, in 2019 and 2020, more than 3,999 calls on domestic violence went cancelled or unanswered, and in 1 year, the Garda Inspectorate has said that 11,000 domestic violence reported incidents led to only 287 arrests. So, Minister, this isn't zero tolerance. It reflects what may be a dismissive attitude within the criminal process. And as a former criminal lawyer, and I'm sure you've heard this too, Minister, all too often a troubling refrain would be heard in the process: ah, it's only a domestic. And that attitude has to be challenged, because we all know the brutal impact that domestic violence has. Women killed or injured by partners, women entrapped in their homes, subjected to coercive control, or being manipulated by former partners through the legal process. That's why we must have zero tolerance, Minister, because the consequences are so appalling for women and for children. And yesterday, I know you launched the final implementation plan for the zero tolerance strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. That's very welcome, and the actions in it are welcome. But we need to hear specifically about how you'll ensure consistency in the Garda response to reports of domestic and sexual violence. Now, undoubtedly, some of the increased calls are due to heightened awareness. But as Sarah Benson from Women's Aid says, the record high numbers are still only the tip of the iceberg. We all know there's a dark figure of unreported sexual and domestic violence in Ireland, and it needs to be tackled. Victims and survivors need support, and Gardaí in local stations are the first line to whom reports are made. They clearly require more training. Guards themselves will acknowledge this. You've acknowledged training needs to be improved. So, Minister, with the new Garda Commissioner to be appointed soon, will you ensure that this new officer tackles this as a priority? Do you accept your own role in ensuring that Gardaí response to domestic and gender-based violence is adequate? And what will you do to address this?
Minister O'Callaghan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Deputy Bacik. And just at the outset, can I say to you, I never heard anyone say that it's only a domestic. And I don't see how anyone could say that when you reflect upon the level of violence and homicides, killings of women that regrettably have taken place on the island. It's simply a really unacceptable aspect of violence in this country, that a significant amount of the violence is targeted against women. And of course, what distinguishes violence against women, predominantly from violence against men, is it is vastly the case in violence against women that they are killed or murdered or assaulted by people with whom they're in a relationship or were in an intimate relationship, or indeed a family member. And it's that connection, I think, that makes it possible for us as policymakers to try to focus on solutions to identify how we can protect women from those who are close to them. In circumstances where you mentioned the issue about An Garda Síochána, like the statistics were set out, I said to Deputy MacDonald that majority had a positive experience with their engagement with An Garda Síochána. Part of the problem, Deputy Bacic, however, is that the Gardaí does have very specialised officers who deal with domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. Sometimes it is the case when a woman initially contacts An Garda Síochána that they don't meet a person within the force who has that level of expertise and training. It is the case that everyone in Templemore goes through basic training in respect of domestic violence, but that advanced, heightened level of training that certain Gardaí have only comes as a result of their focus on that certain area of expertise. I have to say that when women I've spoken to who have contacted and engaged with An Garda Síochána come into contact, particularly with the Gardaí who are expert in the area of domestic violence, they have a very positive narrative. And I'm sure we all recall situations where sometimes we see in the news in the evening a victim coming out of court and expressing their gratitude to An Garda Síochána and how professional they were in dealing with it. It is an ongoing issue, Deputy. There is no simple solution in respect of it. But I think it is also important, that I've stated this repeatedly, there is some benefit, I think, in recognising, not some benefit, huge benefit. We should not compartmentalise this as sort of a woman's issue. This is a societal issue, and it's as much an issue, and in fact it's more of an issue for men and boys than it is for women, because regrettably, my sex are the sex that perpetrate this violence against women to the large extent. So we have to start warning boys and young men about the unacceptability of using violence in a relationship. But of course, there's all other aspects of influence that are imposed upon young boys and men now. Like pornography must be having an extraordinary impact on young men, because it presents women in a very submissive, malleable manner. And we just need to warn people at a young age, educationally, that it is so unacceptable to use violence in a relationship. So not all the solutions are through the criminal justice system.
Of course, I entirely agree with you. Not all the solutions are through the criminal justice system. And of course, this is an issue for all of society to address. This is an endemic social issue, Minister. And, it's survivors themselves who've told me about hearing that dismissive attitude. Unfortunately, it's all too prevalent, not just in the criminal justice system, but throughout our society. And that's why we call for zero tolerance, to tackle that attitude that dismisses what is indeed a desperately serious issue and what is indeed an epidemic. And guards themselves, of course there's excellent practice in An Garda Síochána, but guards themselves acknowledge the need for improved training. And we all know there's a shortcoming in terms of numbers, Minister. The Dublin Task Force has called for 1,000 extra Gardaí. No mention yesterday in your implementation plan of that. And it's not just guards or policing practice. Clearly we need more general reform. A year ago, in response to the courageous advocacy of Natasha O'Brien, Minister, we in Labour brought forward a motion with 8 specific asks on addressing gender-based violence. A year on, Natasha's going to be highlighted in a programme on RTE tonight, calling again for more reform of the criminal justice system to address the needs of survivors. I'll send you our motion, Minister, and I'll be looking for actions on it.
Thank you, Deputy.
Well, I hope that some of the measures she called for are already being acted upon by me, such as the counselling notes, such as guardianship of infants, such as in terms of the issue in respect of a disclosure system to reveal individuals who have been convicted of domestic abuse previously. Deputy, I have no difficulty, and I will speak to the new Commissioner, and I've spoken to the current Commissioner as well in respect of the issue of domestic and gender-based violence. It is something I am prioritising in my time as Minister for Justice. As I said, I want to commend the excellent work done by my predecessor, Helen McEntee, and it's something I'm not going to become less significant than it was under her tenure. We just need to recognise that it requires a societal response. I think zero tolerance is the excellent term that we use in the strategy, because it has to be a type of activity that we have zero tolerance for. It is unacceptable that anyone thinks in a relationship they can resolve issues in that relationship through the use of violence. They can't, and if they do, the criminal justice system will come down very strongly.
Thank you. Now, the Soc Dems, Deputy Gary Gannon.
Before I begin, let me extend the condolences of the Social Democrats at the loss of disability activist Jackie Brown. Her loss will be greatly felt. Minister, the details in today's Women Aid report are deeply disturbing, but they are not surprising. We know that domestic and gender-based violence is insidious. It thrives in silence, in shame and in the shadows, but it is everywhere, in every parish, every institution and every workplace. Last year, over 41,000 women contacted Women Aid. This scale is staggering, but it is only the surface. 1 in 3 women will experience physical, psychological or sexual abuse by a partner or an ex-partner. That's nearly 900,000 women affected by this violence in this country right now. Minister, this didn't happen by accident. We've allowed this violence to grow, and I'm fearful about where it is headed. Because we are now living in a culture where perpetrators of abuse are not only tolerated, they are celebrated. They are the President of the United States, sports stars of multi-million-euro contracts. They are influencers poisoning our young men with misogyny packaged as self-help. This network of anti-women communities online, full of grifters, abusers and con men, is flooding social media with hate. And as a state, we are doing almost nothing to stop it. Minister, over a decade ago, when Irish woman Jill Maher was murdered in Australia, her husband Tom wrote about the monster myth. In that work, he explained to us that abusers are often thought of as monsters, broken, unrecognisable, but they're not. They're often our colleagues, our neighbours, our friends, and the myth lets all of us off the hook. Like the man shouting at a woman in a bar, the hand on her back that she didn't invite, the so-called jokes about rape being shared in WhatsApp groups. That is how violence is normalised. The epidemic of men's violence against women continues to be framed as a women's issue across all facets of society. But Minister, make no mistake, men's violence against women is a crisis for men to be part of the solving. We've created a society where there is such a pervasive sense of male violence against women that we've had to coin the phrase feminicide to describe the epidemic. Even the very term allows men to evade accountability for this ongoing crisis. As men, we need to do more than shake our heads. We need to call out when we see it, because to be silent is to be complicit. Minister, violence against women is nothing new, but social media is supercharging it. Big tech platforms are driving it straight into the phones of young men. Their algorithms reward misogyny, disinformation and abuse because it keeps people scrolling and it keeps the companies making money. Just last year, a study from DCE showed that violent, sexist content was delivered to male-identified accounts within 23 minutes of them logging on, even if the user showed no interest. This is the scale of what we're up against. With the kind of actors we've had to have at the helm of the biggest social media platforms, we cannot afford to drag our feet. Every hour this government delays, it allows violence and hate toward women to be normalised online and across society. So, Minister, my questions are simple. When will your government finally act? When will you regulate these recommender algorithms? And when will you switch off the systems that are spreading hate for profit before more harm is done?
Minister O'Callaghan.
Thanks very much, Deputy Gannon. And I also just want to express my condolences and the condolences of the government to the family of Jackie Brown, the disability campaigner. Deputy, I appreciate the fact that as a man, you've identified that this is predominantly a man's issue because of the fact that the violence against women is perpetrated by men. And you're right in terms of identifying that the influences out there at present on young men are considerably different to when probably you were a young man, and definitely when I was a young man. And as I said earlier, I think it was to Deputy Bacik, we don't see what's really happening online in terms of what young people are being exposed to and how the relationship between a man and a woman is being presented. There are some well-known examples that we know of. You're correct in using the term misogynists out there who treat women as complete objects and present them as, or seek to inform young men how they should treat women in their relationship. However, I think the solution also lies to a large extent with men. I just want to commend the GAA as a sports organisation that has done a huge amount in terms of trying to recognise and combating violence against women. This issue, this epidemic, as people have correctly described it, is only going to be resolved if the vast majority of men recognise that this needs work done by them to emphasise its unacceptability. The GAA have doing it, and I know other sporting organisations are doing it. And I think sporting organisations come with a good authority, because sport, by definition, is physical contest, physical combat. It's fair, it's manly in many respects. But it's an important mechanism by which we have to emphasise and tell young boys and men that using violence against women is not acceptable and is never acceptable. You asked me in terms of what can be done in terms of the social media and the algorithms. In the first instance, there's a big responsibility on social media companies to ensure that they do not allow their platforms to become platforms of misogyny and violence against women. If they do, their business will suffer, and they have a huge societal responsibility to ensure that that is done. In terms of the EU Digital Services Act and digital services coordination, there's a requirement that we get our act together at a European-wide level, Deputy. This is not a problem that can simply be resolved through domestic legislation in Ireland. It requires an EU response. And as you know, at present, there is a divergence between views in the United States and views in Europe as to the extent of regulation. Like, the Irish government is very clear that we do need regulation to ensure that we combat the spread of this activity online. I'm sure you appreciate it is extremely difficult to try to combat it and confront it, but it starts with responsibility based on social media providers, and secondly then we have to ensure that we get our digital services legislation correct at EU level.
Deputy Gannon.
Minister, yeah, I fully concur. The responsibility, of course, lies with men to address this issue, this pervasive issue. But that does not absolve the state of your responsibility either. And the state isn't neglected of responsibilities across a variety of fields when it comes to men's violence against women, be that in refuge centre, the collation of data and the regulation of social media platforms. Minister, absolutely technology has changed since I was younger. It is terrifying. The terror of what it must be like to be a parent of a young boy or a young girl in this country at the moment, when you have social media influencers bombarding them with hate-filled messaging, targeting about their body size, how they should approach the world. And that is why we require regulation. And Minister, absolutely, Europe has a role here, but these tech companies are based here. If we enforce their own GDP standards by which these algorithms rely on, that actually cuts it off at source right now. There is no need for the state to absolve itself of responsibility for this insidious violence that has been inflicted upon women and young girls in this country. And throughout Europe, we can actually lead on this by employing GDPR standards to our tech companies right here.
It is important that I emphasise the role of Commissioner Naman as well, Deputy. Since October 2024, it's adopted Ireland's first online safety code, and the code obliges designated platforms to protect people, especially children, from harmful video and associated content. Listen, people spend far too much of their lives looking at social media. It is not representative. We need to tell young people and adults that what they see on social media is not representative of the real world. It is a misrepresentative aspect of the world, and we all need to emphasise that as politicians and as policy makers. Listen, there's great work being done by Commissioner Naman. I hear what you say in respect of regulating online providers. It's not, and I know you're not suggesting it's not easy in terms of trying to impose statutory requirements on them in terms of the powers that we have. It has to be done in an EU-wide context, and also we just need to continuously emphasise that the type of behaviour that's sort of advocated online is not acceptable. A man and a boy should never raise his hand to a woman.
Thank you. And next we move to the Independent Technical Group, Deputy Ken O'Flynn.
Thank you, Count Corla. Minister, I want to highlight a serious contradiction at the heart of the immigration and passport system, one that raises serious concerns for national security, consistency and public trust. Minister, if I may, let me start with the Irish passport system. Every Irish citizen, as you will know, goes through a rigorous process to get a passport. Parents applying for their first child's passport must submit the long-form birth certificate, photographic ID, proof of address, and have them all signed off by An Garda Síochána. It takes weeks, sometimes months, for that standard, which is strict, but it should be. Now, if we look at what's happening on another arm of the state, people who enter Ireland with no identification at all, no passport, no birth certificate, no official document, documents are being allowed to apply for asylum and later, in some cases, Irish citizenship. And in certain circumstances, they cannot obtain ID, but they are allowed to submit a sworn affidavit instead, a legal document that simply declares who you are. Once that affidavit is accepted, and if a citizen is granted from the Department of Foreign Affairs, then it is accepted naturalisation certificate without question, without issue, and sometimes following that is the issuing of the passport, no further checks or no further balances or no further questions. Minister, this raises a serious issue we now have. A situation where one arm of the state is applying rigorous verification standards and another is accepting unverified personal claims in the form of sworn statements without any way to confirm the truth. Even more worrying, in a reply from my parliamentary questions to both the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Department of Justice, confirms that we do not track and we do not count the many people who are granted the citizenship or passports in this way. The state is simply not counting them. Just to put that number in perspective for you, Minister, 775,000 passports were issued in January to August 2024, and it is anticipated that this year the number will raise to 1 million passports at the end of the year. 56,000 of those were from the county of Cork, my own constituency. And of course, the vast majority of these are legitimate. But should we now take all those applications were subject to scrutiny and based on full verification? Minister, this is not about compassion, or it is about consistency, it is about national security, and it is about waking up to the fact that naivety or laxity can be weaponised against us. Minister, do you accept that there is a gap in the standards of the passport naturalisation process and serious weaknesses? And can you confirm that every single asylum protection is being fingerprinted, identified that comes into this country? Thank you, Caoimhe.
Minister
just to answer your last question, Deputy O'Flynn, while I have it in my mind, yes, anyone who comes in claiming international protection is fingerprinted and assessed against the Eurodac system. And, certainly in terms of anyone who arrives into a port, they are. Deputy, you raised issues about the passport system. And obviously we all want to try to speed up the passport system as much as possible so people can get their passports quickly. You then raised the other issue of people who seek citizenship through naturalisation. I had the great privilege of being down in Killarney on Monday for the purpose of handing, well, I didn't hand out citizenship, it was a judge who did it, but it was there for the purpose of celebrating citizenship that new Irish citizens got. You'll be surprised at the amount of people there who have been in Ireland for years. I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning him, but he received some public prominence. Mr. David Evans, also known as The Edge, was one of the people who received Irish citizenship. Like everyone in this House, I had assumed he was an Irish citizen, but in fact he came to Ireland when he was 1 year of age with his parents from Wales. So there's a very vigorous system, I want you to know, Deputy, in the Department of Justice for the purpose of assessing citizenship applications. And most of the people I meet down in Killarney who are there as an example, most of them have been in this country for very many years. You raised issues as well, Deputy, about people who come in claiming international protection, and then as to when they arrive with no documentation, the affidavits that they subsequently swear. Can I just give you some statistics in respect of the excellent work that's been done by the Border Management Unit within my department, and they are doing doorstep operations on a much more consistent basis at Dublin Airport. In 2024, the Border Management Unit carried out 7,325 doorstep operations at Dublin Airport, and already up to the end of May this year, 2,453 doorstep operations have been carried out this year. So there's a significant amount of work being done by the Border Management Unit. If a person comes in and claims international protection, it's the same in every EU country, and it's the same in the UK. They're entitled to have their application considered and processed. What I'm trying to do is to completely speed up that process, so we don't have a situation where somebody is staying in Ireland for a number of years waiting for their application to be finalised and determined. It's much fairer for them, and indeed on the system generally, if people are given prompt decisions. And if we get prompt decisions, if we get decisions that are made within a period of 3 months, at first instance on appeal, as I'm seeking to do, that won't create the type of situation that you're concerned about, where people who either, if they have been granted international protection and they're perfectly entitled to stay, and they may subsequently apply for citizenship, but if they haven't been granted international protection, they won't be entitled to stay. So I think that is the way the system is dealing with it, Deputy O'Flynn. It's a complicated issue, but in terms of the vigilance within the Department of Justice and indeed Department of Foreign Affairs, I think it's at a high level.
Deputy O'Flynn to respond.
Thank you, Ciarán. Minister, are you satisfied that it is acceptable that Irish passports and citizenships can be granted without proper documentation by your government? That's the question here, Minister. That's what it really is about. Minister, all you've done here on your answer is confirm that people can enter this country without identification, claim asylum, sign a sworn affidavit saying who they are without proving who they are, or we being able to check or putting the balances there, and we're not even counting those. I have 4 questions that I put down to both your department and the Department of Foreign Affairs that confirms all this, Minister. We have to admit that we have to keep our state records, and we have to keep it properly. This is about national security, Minister. This is about knowing who's coming into our country. This is about identifying who's coming into our country, and before we even grant them citizenship, not mind an Irish passport. And you know as well as I do, Minister, if you have to apply for a passport, the ringer you're put through for your child, and we've all experienced it here in the House, trying to get passports through and people rushing for passports, and rightly so. Rightly so, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, to respond.
Thanks, Deputy, I want you to know that Irish passports and citizenship are not granted easily. I know that from, I'm sure the Minister for Foreign Affairs was here, he would confirm that in terms of passports. In terms of citizenship, I get very many requests from colleagues in this House asking me about citizenship applications, and their criticism is it's taken too long. Why is it going through such a lengthy process? And the reason is, when you're handing out citizenship, you have to do very significant vetting, you have to do tests before an individual is granted citizenship, and that is done at a vigorous level. The usual criticism I face from people in the House is that, God, it's taken too long, why can't we speed up the process? In terms of people coming to Ireland claiming international protection, as I said to you, it's an instant, and it happens throughout all EU countries, that people, if they arrive without documentation, they're entitled to claim asylum. However, if they're discovered to be destroying documentation, that is a criminal offence, and people have been prosecuted for that criminal offence under the Immigration Act. So our systems are getting more vigorous.
And Deputy Barry Heenan.
Ara, you bhfuil kind faoi rud cinn tá mail an fóbal faoi láthair agus an rud ná the issue that is really crucial to Ireland's climate ambitions. Something that I really championed over was private wire legislation. It's in the programme for government for the expedition of the legislation. This is the programme for government that we're all supporting. However, it's not being done fast enough. Countries like Denmark, the UK have all moved ahead. Yet Ireland, we still have gigawatts of renewable energy waiting, sitting, waiting for connection. I've spoken to multiple people who are waiting with solar farms, with wind farms, who've waited 18 months, nearly 2 years for EirGrid and ESB to connect to the grid. This isn't acceptable. The delay is going to be costing us billions. We have a full gallery here of people, of the public, who will be facing, through taxes, the fines that we're going to be facing as a country if we don't reach these EU targets. I asked my professor, when I qualified from my degree, what would be the smallest thing we could do with the biggest output? And the thing he said was private wire legislation. Minister, I gave a bill to the OPLA back in January where I proposed 2 modest measures that will act as interim measures, and it's changing this, Section 37 of the Act of 1999. We need to enable people to, when they have renewable projects, to allow them to use private wire legislation, private wires, to connect them. It's not fair. And according to EirGrid Transmission Development Plan of 2012, there is a further 13.3 gigawatts of wind generation and 9.5 gigawatts of other types of generation in the applicant's queue. The CRU recent announcements about data centres will probably mean that data centres will be built along the M50 where fibre connectivity is good. But it's important that the terminal power generation is only used as a rare backup and that excess wind power on the grid is used to charge the large battery banks in the winter when solar generation is low. And Minister, we have to be honest. We saw the recent, recent figures published by the EPA. The report shows that if fully implemented, which I doubt it will be, we're only going to deliver a maximum 22% emission reduction by 2030. We have a huge chance now, before the summer recess, to bring in private wire legislation, and I really urge this government to do so. Also, Minister, on another point, if we don't invest hundreds of millions right now into our ports, I know 90 million went into Cork Port, but we need to be putting hundreds of millions into Cork Port, because these giant vessels that are going to be going into these ports to create our ORE development, they're not going to fit in the port as it is. So we can invest hundreds of millions right now, Minister, which will be saving us tens of billions in the future. So, Minister, I really urge this government to do that, and I'd like the current update on private wire legislation.
Minister O'Callaghan.
buchas go látas an ceist an táfata agus don winter na tíre agus don dul cantar féin. I want to thank the Deputy for raising this important issue. I suspect there may be some people in the House that aren't as aware of private wires issue as you are, Deputy Heenan, and it's always good, and you've spoken to me before about it, to have voices of experience here. But for the benefit of those who understandably may not be aware of it, private wires refer to private individuals or undertakings running their own electricity cables in order to transfer electricity from one site to another. And private wires are separate to the national electricity grid. I want you to know, Deputy, that the government has prioritised increased investment in our grid and expanding our energy generation, with a particular priority on renewable energy sources. Minister O'Brien's department published a set of guiding principles for the development of a policy on private wires, as I know you're aware. And alongside the guiding principles, a summary report of the private wires public consultation and an appendix setting out all responses received was also published. Now, the principles themselves, while not making immediate changes, they're there to guide any changes which are to come and to provide guidance to the public and industry as to the direction of travel in respect of this key area, while reiterating the central role the national electricity grid will continue to play in the electricity system. So developing a fulsome private wires policy is a priority for this government, Deputy, and you will know that from the programme for government, it committed to expediting the delivery of this policy. I suppose the private wires policy will aim to unlock private sector resources. We need to have private sector resources in it to build new electricity infrastructure by expanding the rights of private undertakings to connect supply directly with demand. And the intention is that by allowing private wires, an accelerated investment in new electricity infrastructure to include renewable generation and storage will be seen, which will ultimately benefit the whole electricity system. So, as you're aware, Deputy, it's technically a very complicated area. There's a range of potential options available to Minister O'Brien. I understand from talking to Minister O'Brien that he intends to bring a policy statement to government in advance of the recess. And obviously, as you know as well, and you've put forward your own proposals, legislative change will be required. And subject to approval by government, Minister O'Brien will set out the next steps to give effect to policy changes. So listen, it is a big, complicated, technical area, but I want you to know that it's in the programme for government, and Minister O'Brien is committing to bring forward the change that you're seeking, and that will unquestionably have huge benefit for the people of Ireland and indeed your own constituency.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy.
I 100% agree, especially if you look at how the public viewed any other government waste. We now have a chance to, at the very start of this government term, to bring this in as fast as possible and save us hundreds of millions. Also, especially projects like the North-South Interconnector. If we're going to be hit with these EU fines, but the recent Spanish grid failure should be a wake-up call for us. We need resilience, and the North-South transmission line will also help lower prices by estimates of 5%. That's huge for a family that is struggling. Finally, we also need to make sure that data centres don't use private wire legislation as a greenwashing tactic. Private wires should be used to decarbonise the sector. We have a chance to do this right, and we need it to be brought towards the committee for scrutiny as fast as possible. Minister, the only only thing that I also want to say is, in relation to climate, we can't talk about climate without Dublin Bay. And Dublin Bay, in my constituency, recently had a huge issue with E. coli. This needs to be looked at by the government. It's not happened on the south side of Dublin. It's north side swimmers who are being affected by E. coli.
One question, Deputy.
Sorry.
I don't know.
I'm only new.
I think you said it's north side swimmers are being affected. South side swimmers are affected as well by E. coli. You know, we're not immune to E. coli on the south side of Dublin, you know. Just in terms of what you said there, Deputy, listen, it is a complicated area. In terms of the north-south interconnector, like that is a hugely important issue. Again, just referring back to the north-south Ministerial Council last week, it was an issue that was raised there. There's been too much delay in respect of it, and I know Minister O'Brien is seeking to expedite it. Also, the issue you raised in respect of data centres. Data centres, you know, we have to be in a situation in Ireland where we attract in international investment. And if we start turning ourselves against saying there'll be no more data centres, we're really going to have a very negative impact on Ireland's reputation as being a place where people can come to do business. I'm very pleased with the progress I heard from Minister O'Brien in respect of the private wires, and it sounds like there's going to be very significant developments in it in the near future, and you'll be kept closely apprised of it, Deputy.
Thank you.